Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Muse. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Okay. Before we start, all of this is related, but I want to let you know that we have a class starting in about a month from yesterday, called Reclaiming Erotic Pleasure. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to put the link in the comments. Oh, goodness. It's a big dot. Are we .com or .org? I always forget.
Come.
Okay, thank you. .com/ you know what, I gotta look it up. So I'll do that in a minute. But that is starting, and it's starting in a month, and the whole thing is going to be practices, both practices and didactic information to bring women into a new relationship with their erotic pleasure. And part of that is a process of both redefining and then reclaiming the meanings of both the word erotic and the word pleasure, because they have come to mean very, very specific, narrow things that aren't particularly inviting or expansive or true. And so let's start with what those words generally mean for us, not for us here, but in Western culture. So why don't you take it away, and I'm going to get the link set up.
Okay. You go, Muse.
What does erotic pleasure mean?
This is sort of like a game show.
Yeah. Well, to me, it feels erotic tends to be one of those words that has people going like, or because it's become a fairly narrowly defined set of parameters that border on pornographic or that are erotic is related to sexual. And so erotic equals sex or sexual or something sexually based, which then has us bringing up all of those feelings that come along with that word. And so that's, to me, one of the things when I say the word erotic, or when I have heard erotic in the past, it conjures those kinds of imagery for me. So.
I want to add too that what sex is, or what it means to be sexual, is even more narrowly defined, because it's intercourse, and specifically intercourse between a male body and a female body. So penis and vagina, and that's it. So erotic is basically collapsed down to that one super specific thing.
Yeah, to me, erotic can include, if I think about the overculture's definitions of it, it can include the seductive. Erotic for me has the overtones of the energy and manipulation it takes to get ourselves into that really tiny engagement that you just defined, Alyssa.
Sure. And then pleasure. Talk to me about pleasure.
And we're still just doing the culture's definition
of pleasure. Not ours. Yeah. We'll get there.
Yeah. And that's what we did in our last Facebook Live, was really try to reclaim. We talked a little bit about the lens that we are taught to see pleasure, to experience pleasure through, which tends to be things that are peak experience, kind of a recreation based, things that feel overtly good and are in some ways really commodified and turned into, we've been saying, turned into junk food, really mainlining pleasure. What would you say, Muse?
Well, when I just keyed into there was when you said recreation, which then indicates that it's optional, indicates that it is either when it's deserved, or it's a thing to go for, or it's a thing to sort of turn away from our real life and turn towards pleasure. That was one of the things that came up for me when I heard you say recreation, because I think that actually is it's a correlative that our culture would have us believe. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's confusing, and we've pointed this out, that we get taught these very paradoxical or mutually exclusive things about pleasure, that that we all deserve it, and that you have to earn it.
It's your birthright.
Yeah, it's your birthright, and this really kind of peak experience, orgiastic pleasure that we are trying to unravel for folks, that it's possible for all of us to have it at any time, and we deserve it, and we also have to earn it, and
there's no time for it.
There's no time for it, right? It's a luxury.
Yes, scarcity comes to mind as well. Like, there's not enough out there. I better go get mine before
I have to hoard it
before my
when I
window
have
of
it.
opportunity closes on it. Right? I have to hoard it. It's finite, and that we have to, scavenge for it sometimes, or hoard it, or feel that hunger.
Yeah, or abandon ourselves in order to get whatever bits of it we can.
Gosh, which then has me thinking about pleasures for someone else. That in that sort of self-sacrificing way, is I'm going to give you pleasure, and I might have to sacrifice myself in order to do that, but it's because pleasure is really not for me, because it's extra, and I don't need it. I'm pure, or I'm,
It's a little bleak.
It is a little bleak.
About it.
Yeah. And I'm just realizing that so much of the story that I hear when I sit with couples is, well, we're really good at when it's his turn, but we're not so good at when it's my turn. And this whole idea that, well, first we took care of him, and now we're going to take care of me, or the partners have to take turns to experience pleasure, and it's sort of the checkbox of, there are these 4 things we do for this partner, and then there are these 4 things we do for this partner, and they don't happen concurrently, and it's all kinds of unfortunate.
So yesterday we were starting the planning of the curriculum for this upcoming course, Reclaiming Erotic Pleasure. And we realized we didn't really have a definition for what is our working definition of erotic pleasure. What does it mean? What does it look like? How do we know when we're in it? And, because we make up these titles for these classes, and then it's like we figure out what they are after we've already named them, which is an interesting way of doing things. But we came up with and came up with isn't even quite right. We because it feels like something that comes from the ground up, not something that we're deciding from here, from our minds. And so we came up with a working definition that felt really good to all of us. And the basics of it were that erotic pleasure, and we're combining these 2 words now, not separating them out, and maybe we'll separate them out in this conversation, but that erotic pleasure is embodied and relational, and that it's an experience that leaves you, there's contact that happens, and it leaves you changed on the other side of it. Does that sound about?
And
right?
where, and how about the nourishment piece?
Yeah, we'll say more about that.
And that's a piece that we actually explore quite significantly in this upcoming course. So it's embodied relational intimacy or engagement that is nourishing in some way, and it doesn't. And so we're steering away from like the ooh ah, and allowing that nourishment is fundamentally to our bodies pleasing. It's essential, but it's also fundamentally pleasing. So I would add that.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting us outside of the understanding of pleasure as something that simply feels good.
Yes.
Because that can be so trite and simple, and it can mask so much that might feel good in the moment, but isn't actually nourishing down the road, like eating a bag of candy might feel really good. I do this sometimes, maybe not a whole bag, but eating a pile of candy I feel really good in the moment, and then 30 minutes later doesn't feel so great, which doesn't mean you have to not do it, but there's a way that it's if we just stick to things that feel good without including this piece about nourishment, we can rely on things to find our way to pleasure that are actually not ultimately holistically pleasurable.
That actually narrow our capacity. That's the thing I would say about that, because yesterday we also talked about, we entered into the probably pretty controversial terrain that included the possibility that eating a pile of candy could actually be, by and large, nourishing and pleasurable in the way that could be erotic pleasure, embodied, relational, intimate, nourishing experience. But it just depends on how we're doing it. And with things that are vices, we were talking about drugs, and we were talking about binging on Netflix and binging on booze or whatever. We often have the experience in a shame state, and then we don't stay connected in the cycle of satisfaction to get to harvest all of what is possible there. And so you could actually, in this model that we're working with and that we'll be exploring in this course, you could eat a pile of candy and have it be erotic pleasure. Yeah.
I mean, even the feeling not so great afterwards can be an erotic experience.
Well, yes, it's a consequence of the whole thing. And it might, it could be all sorts of reasons why you wouldn't do that again. But how do we encourage ourselves, and how do we create the nervous system state and the narrative, the cognitive narrative, to let ourselves have the whole experience that we're having?
Yeah, so to me, it's occurring that it's not that we're trying to say, oh, don't ever have the Netflix, drugs, candy, pleasure, but it's a sliver. It's a type of pleasure that can or doesn't necessarily induce more nourishment into our system, and too much of that tips the scale into what you were speaking to, Christiane, of narrowing our definition of pleasure. So if we're going to continue to expand it, we want to maybe transcend and include all of those things.
Other things other than candy and Netflix?
I was just going to say that some of what feels true is that our mind state, I don't know if I like that word, but how we're approaching it, our level of presence as we're in the experience is what matters more than what the experience is itself. And there's limitations to all of this. It's not true 100% of the time, because nothing's that simple. But if you're you can mindfully binge on Netflix, or mindfully eat a pile of candy, or this would be a more controversial thing, mindfully take some heroin.
Yeah.
And be with the entire experience from start to finish. And actually pull so much nutrition and so much pleasure and so much just embodied experience from it.
And one of your constituents in this definition is evolution, is that we're so embodied and available, or we're embodied enough and available enough to the situation, to the relational intimacy we're talking about here, that we come out different. And that could be such a subtle situation. We're different. We come out we come out different from every situation we ever encounter. We're constantly evolving, but in which direction? And are we evolving to expand and be more resilient and more available and present, or are we evolving to ever occlude and constrict and contract our capacity? And so how do we engage? How does that erotic pleasure? How do we engage in erotic pleasure so that even situations that are painful, even situations that are uncertain and scary, allow us to engage fully enough and with enough presence that we are, with enough erotic embodiment, that we come out with just even a little bit more of ourselves available than when we went in. We're evolved in that way.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like we've gone down the pleasure route a bit, and I'm feeling a need to define erotic and how the frame anyway, that we maybe not define, but the frame that we're using with the erotic, because we began by saying it's sensual or it's sexual or it's seductive and things like that. So I'm wanting to move into that part.
Nice. Well, we can go back into some Greek mythology briefly to talk about it. And the one you use most often, Christiane, is that Eros was the fourth god to come into form, and after chaos. And so Eros is that which brings chaos into form. And that very much impacts and influences how we talk about what is erotic. It is chaos brought into form. It is life force energy, the energy of life that is there's so much to it. I was just telling the two of you before we jumped on here, I was walking my dog and it's super windy where I am. And it's just the chaos of it. Like there's form to it, but there's a lot of it feels like it's sort of barely held together in a particular way. And it has so much impact, and there's something about it that's so erotic. I don't particularly like it, but it's very like it's life force moving through the air and moving everything around it. And that is one example of Eros, of what is erotic. I thought Christiane was going to say something, but and so it's so much bigger than sex. It's so much bigger than pleasure. I mean, things can be erotic without pleasure. Christiane, you've spoken about childbirth being that. I mean, it is life force moving through to create more life, to create more form. And there's sometimes an intensity about it. It can be so subtle and quiet at the same time.
Yeah, it feels really helpful to define it. For me, it feels helpful to define it as the creativity impulse, like the creation impulse, the inspiration, the movement towards, the desire to. And it looks like so many different things, but that innate or intrinsic force that moves through all of us in one way or another and has such unique expressions in everything in each of us, that simply just wants to create more. And it always takes some sort of relational intimacy to create. And so, of course, sex is one piece of that, but a painter, creating a painting is deeply in their erotic impulse. And
could be
a plant growing through photosynthesis and soil nutrients is deeply embedded in its erotic engagement. So it's just life creating more versions of itself. And it can, as you say, in that wind example, it can be for all sorts of reasons, it can be very intense
Mm.
to allow ourselves to participate in this thing, in the erotic, in erotic energy, um, because we necessarily don't have control in the outcome. And the more we control the outcome, the less we're actually engaging with the energetic creative force.
You've used the word participation a few times, and I really appreciate that for what it is we're talking about here and how we're shaping this course, because it's really about how to participate more fully with the erotic pleasure opportunities that are out there.
Yeah.
For many.
Yeah. And we, for sure, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. We would say that almost all of that capacity to participate comes from the state of our nervous system. And that, that going into the nervous system, wellness and resilience is really what allows us to then participate more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the participation is in this unknown, in the erotic, creative, generative life force energy. We don't actually have control. We can't check the boxes and make sure that everything is safe and sound before we go and participate into erotic energy. So it is necessary that we don't grab on and try and hang on for dear life to control things, because then we aren't as available to participate. And that's where playing or being in relationship with the erotic, with creativity, generativity, and even with things like our longing and the things that we don't have yet that we want to move towards, that's where the where we can utilize our desire to create our to not create, but to use our desire to then participate in creating a thing that isn't yet known in the world. And this is an example of erotic generativity, which, yeah, I guess I'll just stop there.
And how do you do that if your fundamental embodied experience is that the world is not safe and can't be trusted, which sadly is an experience that is more and more common for many of us. And so a lot of what we're doing here is attending to, is bringing awareness to our fundamental patterned nervous system responses that allow us to, that inhibit or invite us into that engagement that we're talking about. If our nervous system is saying, no, largely I am not safe, and it is not safe, then then it's just simply a matter of boundaries and attempting to control environments that are fundamentally unsafe. And so how do we attend to that, and how do we take stock and take inventory, and how do we nourish and create resilience in us so that we are more available to the goodness, so that we are then involved in that loop of that reciprocity of goodness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Lovely. And this happens through pretty simple, not necessarily easy, but fairly simple practices and awarenesses and ways of orienting to ourselves and the world. Mm-hmm. It's, we're talking about it and I'm noticing it sounds complex. And it is in some ways, because our nervous systems are incredibly complex. They've adapted over a very long time and are capable of so much. And working with them actually is, in so many ways, quite simple.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the needs of our nervous system are very simple and actually quite minimal. And it's surprising that so many of us don't have those minimal needs met. But yeah, it is true. Mm-hmm. And one of the very basic things that we do is not rocket science, that it's very unique in that sets us apart, I think, is that we actually we focus on the wellness that is inherent in the system, even amidst all of the trauma and the wound and the sense of the lack of safety. We simply place our attention on what is so brilliantly well and start with that. And so that makes that takes us right out of all this complex theory and the complexity of the nervous system, and lands us in something that immediately simply is an experience of wellness. What is well within us already that is safe?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Any
And
last, yeah, Muse.
Well, I was just going to say, and then it feels like from there, especially from there, maybe from other places too, but from there, then we can look at the ways that we relate to pleasure, relate to erotic, and relate to nourishment, relate to and discover the barriers that are there. And when we're in relationship with our nervous system, and then bring also our relationship to our cognitive ideas about things, we're in a larger conversation. And that's kind of what, to me, that feels like this class is about, is to engage our cognitive brain and our nervous system to open up the conversation and get to this place of redefining erotic pleasure for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts October 7th. God,
It's a Monday evening.
Yeah, it's a Monday. And the
5th.
website.
No, yes, 5th, October 5th.
Oh, October 5th. Totally wrong. On the calendar. It's online. It's right online. So it's right on our website. Don't listen to me. Check out the website. And the link is in the comments. If you're watching this on Facebook, it is, we'll have it below the video itself if you're watching on YouTube, so that you can easily find your way there. And we'd love to have you join us.
Please do.
There was something else I was going to say. Right. If you have questions or comments, you can, of course, leave them in the comments on Facebook, or you can email us info@instituteforeroticintelligence.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We don't know yet what the topic is, so we'll figure it out in the next 2 weeks. We'd love to see you. Bye for now. How do I end this? Just totally forgot what to do. Okay.